The Joint Operations Center held its breath after the mission ended. Burnt coffee and warm electronics mixed with recycled air. A flavor of hours that ran long. Keyboards moved, but only in soft, careful taps. Status boards refreshed, then settled. A name lived there without a voice to carry it. Senior Chief Natalie Reed. Overwatch for a joint task force. Looked smaller as pixels. No one spoke rank. No one used a call sign. The room behaved as if her line had already turned into a box checked. A burden lifted by paperwork that asked for nothing more than a keystroke. Lieutenant Commander James Carter watched the feed roll from the back wall. He knew how thin air steels lift. Hot and high raises density altitude. Power fades. Torque climbs. Margins disappear. An MH-60 could hover light on its skids. But not with everyone aboard. A crew chief can wave through brownout. Yet physics whispers louder. Reduce the load or accept the crater. Carter understood that truth. Understanding did not make the screen kinder. A human being had become a status change. And the building felt colder for it. Even with fans pushing warm air across consoles. In the corner someone typed a note no one would read twice. The map kept her last position, like a fingerprint. Outside the wire, the wind handled the rest. He pictured the aircraft claw higher when one body stepped back. He could still hear the quiet click where a choice meets a cost. When forms rush toward Kia instead of Dusty 1, who owns loyalty. Morning in Sector 4 rose with heat already at work. Dust drifted in sheets across pale rock and scrub. The air felt close, like the day had skipped its first breath. Senior Chief Natalie Reed lay prone on a limestone shelf and watched the bowl of a small town below. She was Overwatch for a joint task force. A quiet set of eyes that held the tempo. Her cheeks settled to glass while her chest found a steady rhythm. The rifle sat heavy and patient. MK-13, mod 7 inches. 300 Winchester Magnum. Data taped and a small dope book, crease thin at the edges. An optic held the world still while Mirage played tricks at the margins. Her carbine waited within reach. An M4A, one canted, where her hand would find it without looking. The radio sat snug in the harness. An ANPRC 152, checked and then checked again. A pencil map rode under elastic. Corners soft from use. She took the routine like medicine. Water by weight in the hand. Not by guess. IFAK inspected. A spare battery seated where it would not rattle. Wind pulled light from left to right. Half value by the way, dust lifted off a thorn and faded. Confirmed by shimmer above hard ground. She marked the call in her head, with no need to speak it. Below the ridge. The assault element moved like a line taught by long days. Lieutenant Commander James Carter led 6, with spacing that breathed. Tight enough to talk. Wide enough not to fail all at once. Boots found shadow the way habit finds home. Faces had roles before they had names. Chief Petty Officer Mark Deacon Harris carried the mindset of a senior breacher. Petty Officer Second Class Lucas Trent kept comms clean while Petty Officer Jace Walker watched angles and covered gaps. The net was simple and stayed that way. Carter as Ghost Actual. Reed as Ghost Overwatch. The Joint Operations Center answered as Sable. The town looked quiet from distance and wrong from here. Market stalls sat empty when they should have been noisy. Livestock stayed penned. Doors closed. Movement short and sharp, as if timed. On rooftops, she saw shapes where sky should have been. Tarps that hid more than weather. Edges too straight for laundry. Alley lines hinted at routes someone had measured with a practiced eye. Reed let her breathing ease and kept counting the small things. The ground had been arranged. The air tasted of heat and plans. She did not touch the trigger. The sun climbed and made the rock harder under the elbows. Density altitude would rise with it and make later choices tighter. She filed that note and stayed on glass. A feeling settled that was more craft than fear. Quiet that was held shut by hands. Not by peace. She marked likely angles and waited for the day to admit what it was holding back. Heat shimmered on the rooftop line when Natalie Reed saw the shape that did not belong. Fabric hugged a tube angled over the courtyard, and twins of the same intent waited under the tarp. The kill box was set for the first step into open ground. Lieutenant Commander James Carter did not have this angle. Reed kept the glass steady and passed a short transmission on the net. Identifying Ghost Overwatch. Ghost, actual. And the rooftop on the east. The wind call held at half value from left to right. She settled the Mk-13 Mod 7 and let breathing smooth the reticle. The first round broke on the upper torso of the RPG gunner, ending the launch before it could live. A clean bolt run followed, and the second man fell while his head was still turning. Silence died in an instant. Doors snapped and feet moved with discipline, not panic. Across the alleys. Far to the south, a truck engine came up hard. Like a plan picking up speed. Carter accepted the shift without wasting the cadence. Reed answered with the next piece. A simple confirmation that the ambush was neutralized and the entry lane was open. The assault element flowed around the courtyard and drove for the doorway. Chief Petty Officer Mark Deacon Harris tossed M18 smoke to blind the most dangerous window. The screen billowed and took angles away from defenders who had waited for a clean lane. The team pressed inside the compound and kept momentum. From the ridge, Reed stayed on glass and fed the small advantages that keep people alive. A second-floor north wall left window flashed early, and she sent the call out before anyone took the lane. The return fire died as quickly as it rose. Inside. Hands pulled a resisting high-value target named Abdul Rahim Karim into custody. Petty Officer Jace Walker took a round through the right leg and leaned hard on a shoulder while the stack kept moving. Petty Officer Second Class Lucas Trent held comms with Sable and kept the net clear. Dust hung over the alleys like gauze, while the last doorway fell. The element disappeared into the rooms and the courtyard stopped being a trap and became cover. Reed did not relax. She stayed in Overwatch and waited for the ground to answer back. The landing zone was a tight scrape of hardpan, wrapped in dust. An MH-60 slid into a low hover, and the world turned the color of sand. Rotor wash built a brownout that ate the horizon and chewed at depth. Heat sat on the ground like weight. Density altitude climbed with every minute. And lift fell away from the blades. Power margin thinned until numbers mattered more than intent. The crew chief leaned out into the grit and carved signals with both arms. Inside the cockpit, a calm cadence weighed torque limit against turbine temperature. The pilots held light on the skids and tested what the engines could give. On the perimeter, the assault element moved as one shape. The high-value target bucked and burned energy against restraint. Petty Officer Jace Walker leaned into two shoulders. His right leg failing, but his jaw set. Natalie Reed watched the posture of the aircraft instead of the people. The bubble of air under the rotors thickened and collapsed in small waves. Each dip said the same thing about weight and heat and time. The pilots tried another pull. The MH-60 came up a half meter. Hung there with the sound stretched tight. Then settled as torque brushed the line, and turbine numbers crept hot. The crew chief threw a hard stop and reset the flow. Ghost Actual pushed the stack toward the door and fought the chaos clean. Reed counted bodies and gear. Then rewound the math that air insists on. Load. Temperature. Altitude. And the sand wall building to the west. She stepped to the skid. Met the eyes that wanted a different answer. And took one measured pace back into the wash. The aircraft shifted lighter by more than it looked. The brownout peeled a shade thinner. Inside the cockpit, the choice became simple. Hold light on the skids. Add power in a clean rise. And climb before the wall of sand closed the lid. The helicopter cleared the lip of the village and used the last of the margin to run for clean air. Dust swallowed the noise a moment later and left only grit ticking against rock. Reed stood in the new quiet, with the storm moving in her direction. The decision she made did not ask for credit. It honored physics so the rest of the team could live. The sand hit like a curtain yanked across the sky the moment the MH-60 pulled away. Visibility fell to an arm's length, and then less. Dust scraped the teeth and turned the world into a tunnel. Natalie Reed cupped the radio in her palm and felt grit in the seams. She powered the ANPRC 152 down to save the battery and protect the set from the storm. Static could not help her now. She moved off the landing zone on a line that cut perpendicular to the obvious path. No straight runs back toward the ridge. Straight lines invite guesses and fire. Rounds thumped somewhere behind her with the flat sound of indirect fire. The pattern walked across the ground like someone bracketing a memory. She kept her pace low and deliberate between pockets of cover. E lived in small disciplines. She counted steps between limestone ribs and shallow gullies. She counted breaths to keep oxygen steady and thought in distances, not minutes. The wind tried to peel her from the ground, so she used the terrain in return. Rock edges became blinders that broke line of sight. Small rises hid footprints and took angles away from anyone who guessed right. Sweat came first in a thin sheet and then stopped. Her tongue felt thick and her mouth turned to paste. She did not shake the canteen or check it again because panic wastes water. She paused only where the land insisted. A knee. A breath. A look at the next piece of cover. Then forward. The rifle stayed tight in the pocket, with the muzzle shielded from sand. Somewhere in the gray, she felt the horizon vanish. The radio was only hiss, and then quiet. What remained was a kind of Duos-2-1 that the desert writes by itself. Not a line on a board, but the space where a person keeps moving. The wind eased from a roar to a harsh breath, and the sand settled into a pale fog. Natalie Reed felt heat sitting on her back like a hand and kept moving at a careful knee bend. Stress bled into small tricks of sight. A figure formed at the edge of vision, soft as a memory, then stretched thin and broke apart when she blinked against grit. She tested reality with her hands. Fingers found limestone, rough and warm. Then the webbing of her Overwatch kit. The weight of magazines. The pull of the sling against the shoulder that carried the rifle. Breathing became a checklist. 4 counts in through cloth. 4 out. Each cycle steady enough to quiet the fast messages that heat tries to send to a tired brain. A narrow cut in the rock opened like a door. Shade gathered there, and the temperature dropped just enough for thought to sharpen, and sound to return as a soft drip somewhere deeper inside. She followed the noise and found a thin seam of water easing from the wall. A clean cloth filtered the trickle. Grit settled, and she took slow, patient sips that calmed the stomach instead of shocking it. EFAC stayed where it should. Bandage tight. Gear packed with nothing loose. She counted what was left without looking twice. Marked a rest that would not steal momentum. Then felt the air for a shift that meant it was time. The plan reset itself in small, useful lines. E would not run toward friendly lines. It would track along broken ridges, pick routes that bend sight, and use slices of shade when the sun punished movement. She staged the next hours with quiet hands. Magazines rode where fingers would find them in the dark. A canteen sat where habit lives. And then she stood and left the cut, choosing survival by discipline, not by luck. Night thinned the storm to a grainy veil and gave sound its shape again. Natalie Reed caught the rhythm first. Even steps with clean spacing that belonged to trained men. The cadence said they were closing with patience, not panic. She slid toward a narrow choke where 2 rock faces squeezed the path. The cut forced bodies into single file and brought muzzles near stone. Control would matter more than speed here. She backed into shadow and waited on a steady breath count. The first tracker eased through with weight forward and rifle high. She let him clear the lip and stepped into him like a door closing. The wall took his muzzle. Her shoulder took his balance. Steel found the line it needed, and she lowered the body slow so the rock did not speak. Gravel rustled as the second man pivoted into the gap. Reed closed the distance before his sights could settle. She redirected the muzzle into stone, and the shot died against the wall like a swallowed cough. Weight and hips did the rest. She kept the rifle pinned and ended the fight without a second sound. Noise discipline mattered more than pride. Farther out. The third set of steps paused, then faded back with control. He chose distance over a blind rush, which meant training and a radio. She let him go because survival, not a body count, was the mission. She cleared the fallen with practiced hands. A radio, canteens, and magazines went into places her fingers knew in the dark. She checked a light carbine for compatibility, and still preferred the certainty of her M4A1. PID stayed in her head even now. The work had to remain clean and necessary. She left pockets untouched if they offered nothing to the next hour. She reset her E&E plan on the move. A gentle arc took her away from the choke. Never along a straight line. Never holding a single elevation for long. The rock gave her new cover and took back angles she did not need. Breathing loosened into a slow cadence as she gained the next ridge. The radio stayed quiet by choice. Pace and silence bought time while the desert listened and learned nothing. Air conditioning pressed against the walls of the Joint Operations Center while the status board shifted its colors. A small space on the screen changed beside the name Senior Chief Natalie Reed. Outside the wire, the desert burned. But in here, the room felt refrigerated and hushed. Infrared imagery rolled across a canyon many kilometers from the landing zone. 2 or 3 heat signatures cooled on the floor of rock. A single figure moved with balance that belonged to training. Head scanning in smooth arcs. Steps set with weight centered and no wasted swing. Lieutenant Commander James Carter knew that posture the way a pilot knows the sound of his own aircraft. He said nothing because some rooms ask for stillness more than opinion. The soft buzz of fans and the click of keys set the tempo of restraint. Colonel Thomas Keene, the sector commander, stood close to the main display and made a decision that ignored the normal path to a dust one. He directed the board to mark Kia based on weather and threat, and ordered no diversion of search assets. Any movement without positive identification would be treated as hostile until further notice. Technical Sergeant Brian Ellis, from the United States Air Force, slid quiet to a workstation and saved the raw ISR clip with full timestamps. He did not argue. He captured what the sensor saw and placed a small drive where it would not be forgotten. The board settled and left 3 hard letters next to Natalie Reed. The room accepted the update the way a printer accepts paper. Carter kept his eyes on the feed. Jaw steady. Hands empty. A picture of a man keeping formation inside 4 walls. Pixels cooled on the canyon floor, while one shape disappeared into broken light. The difference between infrared data and the intuition of a field officer stretched across the room like a wire you do not touch. Paperwork can erase a life faster than wind can move sand. And the building went quieter, as if it understood. Natalie Reed powered up the captured radio and rolled through frequencies with a slow thumb. Static broke into fragments of grid references and movement checks. Clipped voices that cared more about coordinates than names. She listened without answering and let the pattern settle. A familiar ops rhythm emerged from the noise. The Joint Operations Center sent confirmations and cautions in the same breath. Cool against the heat, coming off the rock. She recognized the cadence of a building far from dust. Then the guidance arrived as policy shaped into transmissions. Colonel Thomas Keene's intent moved across the net like a gate closing. No personnel recovery in this weather. No diversion of assets. Treat any movement as hostile without positive identification. The words fit the room she had left behind. Reed weighed the value of information against the risk of being seen by ears. A keying click can mark a person more quickly than a footprint can. She chose silence and powered the set down. That choice reshaped the day. Rescue shifted from a plan she could wait for to a variable that might never arrive. Survival became something she carried herself from cover to cover. She set her gear to match that truth. Magazines moved to places her hands find in darkness. Front and strong side, where muscle memory lives. The M4A1 stayed primary. The MK13 Mod 7, only when terrain allowed patience and reach. Water allocation followed function. She measured by work, not fear. Small sips that kept thinking clear and cramps away. A bandage check on the arm confirmed tight pressure and useful grip. The route changed with intent. E and E would not point at friendly lines like an arrow. It would bend across broken ridges, step the elevations, and cut angles that made spotting difficult and pursuit wasteful. Each leg grew shorter and smarter. She walked until a feature gave cover and then rewrote the next move with what she could see and feel. Wind and light became allies again. Breath settled into a clean cadence that matched the land. The goal reframed itself into something simple and hard. Live long enough for truth to find air. She moved out. Not hopeful, but clear. The canyon opened like a chalk mark carved into the hills. Natalie Reed read it with the eye of a sniper and a survivor. Light struck one wall sooner and threw hard shadows across the other. She mapped the angles the way you map a memory. Loose shale sat stacked in a shelf that would move if pushed. Echo bounced in ways that could lie about distance. Fieldcraft came first. She laid a false trail that looked tired and a little crooked, as if an injured person had limped through in a hurry. Scuffed stone and a few off-balance steps set the invitation. She took the high ground where the sun sat at her back. Glare would punish anyone who looked up at the wrong second. Heat mirage shimmered at knee height and softened edges. Fire control set the rhythm. Positive identification lived in her scope before any round left the barrel. The MK13 Mod 7 settled into bone and sling until recoil would come straight back and die clean. 3 figures eased in. Then 2 more spread to the edges. The false trail pulled them toward a bend that pinched. Their spacing said they felt confident and practiced. Her opening shot did not hunt a chest. It kissed the weak spot on the shale shelf and turned rock into a small slide. Gravel poured into the path and stole their retreat without burying them alive. They broke to find cover that did not exist. She used short, placed shots to steer movement instead of spraying hope. One round pinned a knee to a shadow. Another took a muzzle offline. Recoil management stayed honest. She let the rifle settle, ran the bolt without slapping it, and refused to chase a target with panic. The M4A1 stayed ready for any close rush that never came. Sound rolled out and thinned. She counted heartbeats, watched for a hand or a shoulder that would prove a threat still lived, and waited past the first urge to move. Nothing pushed back. Only then did she back out of the hide. She dropped elevation, shifted bearing, and stepped into a new slice of terrain that broke line of sight. The canyon held her message without a word. The lesson was simple. Use light, rock, and patience before you use ammunition. Leave with more options than you brought. The Joint Operations Center felt smaller after the status board changed. Air conditioning hummed, while screens carried silent maps that pretended to be calm. Lieutenant Commander James Carter stood at a side table and laid his kit out in a straight line. His hands moved with the care of someone counting breaths. He reached to his shoulder and stripped a patch free. The fabric folded once and then again, as if size could make weight disappear. Across the floor, the ISR feed kept rolling through angles of pale rock. No one leaned in. No one asked for a replay. Technical Sergeant Brian Ellis watched from his console and chose movement over noise. A small drive slid across the surface until it met Carter's glove. The file held raw ISR with timestamps that argued without speaking. Ellis kept his eyes on the monitor. Posture squared like a checkpoint. Colonel Thomas Keene, the sector commander, stood near the main display and did not offer words. Authority rested on presence, and the room understood that boundary. People avoided each other's eyes and pretended to be busy. The glow of the displays washed faces into the same shade of gray. Carter paused with the drive in his palm. The plastic felt light for the kind of truth it carried. He opened his pack and made room where important things live. The zipper closed with a small sound that cut through the fan noise. The ISR window kept updating grids that no one read aloud. Outside, distance and heat did their old work far from carpet and chilled air. Respect did not ask permission here. It took the shape of a quiet decision and a hand that did not shake. No tasking blinked on any slate for Carter. He had a line inside that needed no briefing to exist. The room settled back into the rhythm of keyboards and filtered air. A life had been reduced to letters. And a man chose not to let that be the end of it. The day turned hard and bright. So, Natalie Reed kept the sun behind her shoulder. Glare punished any watcher who tried to look uphill. Line of sight bent under heat and shimmer. She avoided open ground unless the trade was worth it. Rock spines, shallow cuts, and crusted berms gave her edges to work with. Each feature broke angles and bought a few more heartbeats. The bandage on her arm stayed firm under the sling. She pressed and felt only a slow warmth, not a pulse. A quick grip test told her the hand still belonged to her. Fever tried to whisper in small waves. She timed a squeeze and release with every few steps to keep function honest. The cycle kept nerves from lying. M4, A1, stayed primary across the chest. During short halts, she brushed sand from the chamber and checked the magazine base plates by touch. The bolt carrier ran clean enough for the work ahead. The Mk13 Mod 7 rode only when terrain promised patience. When the ground allowed a longer pause, she ran the handle to confirm a smooth feed. Weight and reach had to earn their place. Heat set the pace more than the map did. She moved when the sun was loud because hunters prefer better light and cooler hours. Shade halts caught the worst spikes and let her head clear. Water management stayed inside rules she trusted. Small, measured sips kept thought straight and muscles from cramping. Mouth feel and the color she did not want to see told their quiet story. Pace count lived under the math of distance and heat. Each leg ended at cover that gave two choices for the next move. Elevation changes cut patterns before they could form. She kept a running inventory without staring into the pack. Ammunition sat where fingers knew before eyes. The canteen rode where her left hand reached without thinking. The goal stayed simple enough to survive the afternoon. Live long enough for a right decision to touch ground. She walked with a steady breath and a shadow that belonged to her. Inside the Joint Operations Center, James Carter closed his kit with the precision of habit. Screens hummed and the status board held its hard lines. No tasking waited for his name. Brian Ellis set a small drive beside the packed gear. The ISR clip lived there with clean timestamps and the kind of detail that does not need commentary. Carter understood what it meant to carry something that heavy and that quiet. He did not look to Colonel Thomas Keene for permission. The sector commander watched the feeds and kept his silence. The room understood that a line had been drawn without a briefing. Air conditioning pressed cool air across the consoles. The glow of maps flattened color and made people look the same shade of tired. Carter slid the drive into a protected pocket and tested the zipper with one firm pull. Outside the wire. Natalie Reed adjusted her grip and checked the bandage at her arm. Pressure held, and the hand answered with enough strength to stay useful. The sun had dropped just enough to soften the edges of rock. She moved with the light at her back, so glare worked for her and not against her. Each step chose broken ground over a straight run. The pace said she was not done and not in a hurry. two lives ran on parallel rails. One lived under chilled air and policy. One lived under heat and patience. The message that carried both was simple. Loyalty does not live on a status board. Loyalty lives in the person you refuse to erase when it would be easy to look away. There is a small lesson for life in that. Sometimes you step back from the skid so the team can climb. Small disciplines repeated become strength that lasts when speeches fade. Truth often survives because someone saves a file at the right moment. It travels in actions that do not need an audience. It arrives when people keep faith with what they saw. If this Mill-inspired story moved you, consider following the channel, so more of these quiet choices are not lost. This is fiction shaped by the techniques and procedures of the United States military. With respect for standards like Dust 1, ADD, ISR, and personnel recovery when conditions allow. We honor the craft by getting the details right. Carter lifted his pack and stepped back into the corridor light. Reed kept her breath steady and let the evening carry her shadow forward. Both chose what not to erase and kept moving,